Welcome to the Wealthy Business Goddess Show for purpose-driven, passion-fueled spiritual entrepreneurs ready to live their purpose, passion and prosperity as they create the life and business of their dreams whilst transforming the world, doing what they love and making fabulous money. Each week we bring you inspiring and empowering topics, popular thought leaders to empower you to transform all areas of your life and business. With your host, spiritual intuitive, entrepreneur, transformational business coach and mentor, Kimberly Lovell.
Hello sweethearts, it's Kimberly Lovell here, your host for the Wealthy Business Goddess Show, and I'm super excited today to introduce you to Leslie Karen Hammond. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Kimberly. So happy to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to have a really interesting chat today about empowering stories. So let me just tell you a little bit about Leslie. Leslie is an empowering story whisperer, and she's a 3 times author of Keep It Real, Why We're Afraid to Speak Up and What to Do About It, Women Rising, love that, and How to Go from Uncomfortable to Unstoppable and Tap Your Source. A nationally known spiritual teacher and healer, she shows health coaches, healers, and alternative healthcare advocates how to embrace their triumph through adversity as a teaching tool to inspire their clients, families, and their communities. So this is a super exciting topic. I think the whole idea about sharing our story and inspiring and empowering others. Story is so powerful. So Leslie, you're referred to as the empowering story whisperer. Do you want to tell us what that means and why do people need an empowering story?
Sure, Kimberly, happy to. Everyone has a little voice inside their head that attempts to get them to believe they don't deserve to be heard, their story doesn't matter, they're not worthy. I mean, the list goes on. And for me, it is such a privilege to hold my clients in a space of safety and help them to see what I see in them. Because so many people, they don't believe, because they haven't had adequate support, that their whole journey has prepared them for where they are. I mean, mentally, that sounds good, and we can sometimes wrap our mind around it, but until you can wrap your emotion and your heart and your spirit around it, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, and I think particularly for healers, therapists, and coaches, because we're givers, and so we're not used to receiving, so we're the ones giving the support, and often that comes from that background of not having received it, right?
Exactly.
So I do a lot of mindset work with people around, visibility and being seen. And so, yeah, really, really important work, because in order to get our gifts out in the world, we need to be able to share our story. Yeah.
Well, it's so true. And one of the reasons it's so important that people, believe this on a visceral level, it's completely about authenticity. Because if they're feeling like they don't belong because there's a part of them that hasn't attained everything that they're trying, that they're teaching, which is, that's why everyone gets into the business, so to speak, because of a wound. If they can't fully do that, then there's always a part of them that will not be present in the work. And just the way that a dog or a horse can smell fear, a client or an audience will also be able to detect that. They won't always be able to put their finger on it, but they'll sense that something's off a little bit.
Yeah, love that. So we're talking about being in our integrity and being with our truth. And I think one of the things that I find for myself as well, is about that bit about, which part of our story is useful. And I mean, all of it's useful, right? But there's certain parts of our story that we're going to be sharing, depending on what we're, wanting to inspire and empower our listeners with and our community with. And I guess it's about a little bit of that. What I hear a lot from women is this whole thing about the fraud syndrome, the imposter syndrome, which is what you're speaking to, that kind of sense of shame or unworthy. So yeah, and I know this is something that I've kind of because we're all a work in art, and so wherever we're at, we've always got something to share with people, right?
Agreed.
So why don't you talk about how how you can help women and what women can do in order to move beyond that imposter syndrome, because we haven't got everything together, we're not perfect, and that's okay.
No, of course not. One of the first things that I would invite women to really own is the fact that they've survived everything they've gone through up until this very moment. Yeah. And that was for a very specific reason. So if they can view that entire journey from a place of love and appreciation and gratitude, then that's the first place to start. Now, granted, women and heart-centered men, I mean, we all go through a certain level of atrocity, being wronged. I mean, there's always something. But when you can appreciate the experience in hindsight for what it was and how it's taught you something and made you stronger, then you'll be able to extrapolate the most powerful teaching components of that. And you'll find that the people you attract are those who they resonate with that vibration that you have, because they need you. So you will ultimately connect and you'll be of best service to them.
Yeah, love that. And I think that's so important, that when we're in it, maybe there's kind of like a piece that has to, time that has to elapse before we can sometimes see the lessons and the gifts. I call them lessons, blessings, and gifts. And then it's almost as though really part of our purpose often is about that wounding, and our community and our tribe are called in because they have a similar wounding. And so it's really powerful to be able to own your story and your history, because that's what you're here to help people with. Yeah, absolutely.
And the more that people practice this, the faster they will get. Because I mean, I myself, I have wounds that go back, I mean, decades. I'm 51, and there are things that happened when I was a year and a half old that I'm still coming to terms with. But the important thing to for the viewers and the listeners to wrap their heart around is that even though it may feel like you're coming to the same challenge again and again and again and again, it's important to know that each time you approach it, you're coming from a different place. So you're not the same person who was approaching this, this problem as you were a day ago, a month ago, a year, or a decade ago. So each time you revisit it, you have a place to grow from, because you're in a different space.
Yeah, I love that. And I think sometimes as healers and coaches, sometimes we're always looking for that improvement. We're kind of like improvement junkies, right? And it's like it's never enough. So we're kind of like driven to improve and to be the best we can be. And I think one of the saddest things I see, and I've felt this for myself sometimes, and I have to catch myself in it, is that actually we're enough just as we are, right? And I know that you talk about this.
Well, it's true. We are always enough where we are, but there's an intellectual enough, there's an emotional enough, a spiritual enough, and a physical enough. So if we can believe that we're enough for that moment, then it eliminates that, that beating ourselves up because we don't believe that we are. Now, granted, there's always improvement for what we can do with our bodies in terms of movement and how we, what we eat, what we put in this machine to propel it forward. I don't believe perfection is a word that should remain in anyone's vocabulary. It's overrated. Practice makes progress, not perfection. So there's always room to grow. And if it can be viewed as as growing and as expanding and as increasing a vibration, then it shifts from the not enough to a growth experience.
Yeah, Great. So tell us about your latest book, Keep It Real, and why we're afraid to speak up, and importantly, what we can do about that.
I had this theory for the longest time that people weren't born afraid to speak up. Mm-hmm. And then after 18 years of working with people and as a healer myself, it occurred to me that when a child is in vitro, it feels everything. What if when a mother is carrying a child, she's going through a lot of emotional and mental torment? How can the child not take any piece of that? Because the body, for anyone who's ever, who's a mother, you know that when you were carrying your child, if you ate something the child didn't like, you'd get a little kick. If you slept on the wrong side, you'd get a little kick. So everything that the mother experiences is conveyed to the child. Emotion is no different. So if there is a mother who is constantly being shut down, devalued, told her opinion doesn't matter, then it is very likely that the child takes the energy of that on. So when they come into the world, they see firsthand what the parent is going through, and it's almost a double whammy because they have what they experienced in the womb, and then it's the environment. So to some degree, I now feel that some are born afraid to speak up precisely for that reason. So,
and I think it's not just the in vitro, because that's important, whatever's happening in this lifetime, but we've also got the imprinting from the ancestors in our genetics. So even if your mother was, speaking up for herself, it may be still in the genetics, and that we come in with this patterning, and society conditions us, doesn't it,
Oh, absolutely. Any work that we do in this lifetime doesn't impact solely this lifetime. It goes forwards, backwards, and parallel. It goes in every direction.
Yeah, so we come in with this conditioning then that it's not safe to speak our truth or express our gifts, and how can we change that?
Lots of practice. Of practice and seeking out communities where it is safe. And sometimes, most of the time, I think when people hear the word safe, they think about a physical threat. They don't always think about an emotional threat. But when someone is not accustomed to, being embraced for what they think and feel, then those can all become mixed together, and a threat of any kind is constituted as a threat, and their whole person feels like it's in danger. So start very small. And for example, here's something really simple. In a restaurant, how many people have you seen in a restaurant when they place an order with the waiter or waitress, they say, "Can I have?" They ask a question instead of making a statement. "I want." It's so small, but there's so much in the language of how we communicate. And take a look at the way people apologize all the time for things that they have no business apologizing for. So there's a lot of places to start very small, because it's not practical to expect someone or anticipate someone to be able to fully dive in and suddenly embrace this, powerful person who can stand there and speak their truth fearlessly. It doesn't happen that way. It's a slow progression of progress.
Yeah, love that. So small steps and practice makes progress.
Yes, it does. Quick study.
Love it. Yeah. It's interesting. I was just thinking that there was, I had an experience a couple of months back, actually, in a group of people where something that I shared that was, I think I was talking a little bit about my wounding, and I was saying, it's great to be with a group of women where we're in collaboration rather than competition, right? and that how that wasn't always my experience. And it was really interesting because the response that I had made me feel really unsafe. And it was kind of like, it was kind of dismissive. It was almost like, it was almost like I was being negative for saying that. It's like, oh, well, that wasn't my experience. And it was that whole kind of thing about, being spiritual and being kind of all talking about the light and, but not wanting to look at the shadow, not wanting to acknowledge the shadows. It's like if you mention anything like that, then that's negative, we're wanting to stay positive. That energy, which for me isn't safe, and I think this happens for a lot of us in terms of families where we've got certain things that we've grown up in our family that we're allowed to talk about and certain things that we don't talk about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's clients I've had who, we worked together through a few different things, and one of the processes was helping them tell their story and publish an inspirational book. And you would not, Mabel, you would believe the resistance that comes up in people, because all of a sudden they get so worried about, oh my goodness, it's going to be like me standing in the middle of the street with no clothes on and everyone is staring at me. It's this, level of vulnerability that almost seems, overwhelming. However, by the end of the process, it's really, the book is a byproduct of the growth, of the emotional growth and the spiritual growth that occurs. So it's so important for people to internally come to terms with that story and no longer want to run from it. And that process takes a while before they're ready to stand up and to proudly proclaim what it is that, that they're owning on the inside.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful in terms of attracting our clients. And what I've seen is that when people are sharing perhaps their most shameful story, or what would have been a shameful story for them, and they're being really vulnerable, that people absolutely love it. Because often it's like, there's something that we're all not saying, right? And then when one person shares, it gives permission for everybody else to say, yes, that happened to me too, or yes, I've been feeling that.
Well, absolutely. It adds this level of humanity, because there's so many people that want to be perceived in the world as, okay, this is me. I've done the work. I'm showing up. I'm all that in a bag of chips. Not always from an ego perspective, but they don't want anyone to know about all of the struggle that happened on the way to get there. But that's the juicy part that will attract people to them, is because they put them, they take themselves off that perceived pedestal and they level the playing field, and it makes someone incredibly approachable.
Yeah. Great. So let's talk a little bit about your background and your story and how you became an expert in this area, Leslie.
Oh goodness. Lots of loss, and having my life saved a few times from a lot of instances where I could have easily been wiped out and be 6 feet under. I mean, when I had mentioned something that happened when I was 1.5 years old, my biological mother was killed in a car accident, and I was in the car next to her. And it took me a long time to really, well, first of all, I didn't know that I was next to her when she died until probably 2.5 years ago. And then there's this whole level of coming to terms with all of the stories that I misinterpreted over time growing up. And then throw in there my knight in shining armor, who hasn't had one of those, that turned out to be, who was an alcoholic, and yet one of my greatest teachers. And it was because of him that I ultimately ended up finding the energy work and being so magnetized by the power of that and my own healing that it became something I couldn't not do. And as a result of all of that, I found the power in helping others feel safe, because I knew what it was like to not feel safe. And I know what it's like to not feel worthy, that you deserve happiness and love, and to, you know, to be respected, because I was so used to being shut down for so long, and just, you know, having the voice, losing the voice, becoming incredibly independent at such a young age, and then the submissive good wife. I mean, so there was this constant, you know, mastery and loss, and lots of opportunities to see things differently. And when I fully understood the power of how the slightest shift in one's perspective can change everything, it just, night and day. And I mean, I don't want anyone to feel for a moment that I've achieved everything, all the growth that is important for me, because I'm constantly learning things. And just the beauty of it is, because of all of these years of practice, it's now come to a point when I can be in the midst of some behavior that isn't healthy, and I'll catch it pretty quickly. And then I can stop, and if in fact I'm engaged with someone else, so my husband now, God bless him, he understands spiritual work. He's an avatar master, among other things, but he understands that it's not something personal and that I'm doing some work. So if I can stop and say, ooh, I just realized what I'm doing and I apologize, it's not personal, but maybe you're inviting me to stretch and I wasn't quite ready for that expansion yet because it wasn't my idea.
Yeah.
So it's all of these, you know, all of these experiences that have been woven together that keep presenting me with an opportunity to be more authentic, to continue to show up even when it's incredibly difficult, and to like constantly walk the talk. That's really where the juicy stuff is. Yeah. It's to follow everything that I teach people. And as you well know, there's always opportunities to do that.
I see it's the opportunity for us to become more of who we are. So we're ever expanding and becoming more. But yeah, it's always a work in progress, and you know, the learning never stops. But you know, it's like an adventure. And when we're in that mindset of actually, you know, it's okay. We don't have to kind of create a drama around it. It's just our stuff that's coming up, you know, and then something's going on, and yeah, we're able to grow and to have that higher perspective.
Well, I think everyone comes to a point when they realize that fighting it takes more energy than just running head on into it and through it to the other side. But there's so many people that are in this state of fear because they feel opening that can of worms, they'll never reach the bottom. That it'll just be this like black hole they get sucked into that they'll never come out. And what so many people don't realize is that when you open that can and you just jump right on in, that everything changes in such a beautiful, beautiful way. But everyone needs support with that. It's not something that the faint of heart ought to attempt alone.
That's for sure. Okay, so what are the biggest reasons that you think people struggle with being transparent?
It's fear of judgment. Everyone is so afraid of being judged. And one of the reasons I feel that happens is because those who fall into that trap often judge very quickly themselves. And it's like the piece of sliver in your finger that never quite came out, and it just kind of festers in there, and it doesn't bother you unless you hit it just the right way. And so that's what happens here. People who tend to judge are more fearful of being judged because of the wounds they have. And that creates, like, sometimes we'll see people who turn reactive for apparently no reason. You know, there's some kind of a trigger that sets them off. And this still happens to me, but I'm able to catch it most of the time relatively quickly. But when people get that trigger, they often don't take the time to figure out why that trigger is happening, what's behind it, and then do the work to free that up and to release all of that.
Yeah, and I think that, I know for me, it's really interesting. Sometimes I'm even feeling myself hesitate as I'm about to share something here, so that's interesting, right? So I kind of grew up with the message that you don't air your dirty linen in public. And so there was kind of like a lot of, I think a lot of shame. And even now, sometimes if I get really annoyed, I might shout, and I might swear, and my partner will tell me to close the windows, and it reminds me of my mother. And the more I'm told to close the windows, the more I don't care whose it is, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, it's like we're all human, and it's just so interesting that there's this kind of, I think it's like that critical part sometimes where we've experienced the criticism or the shame and the judgment, that we internalize it. So it's not that we're judgmental people. We may be, you know, the most non-judgmental people with others, but still be really hard on ourselves and judging ourselves because of that experience earlier.
Well, I was always the outcast in school. Never, I mean, it just, that happened to be my path, and it was one of the most difficult lessons in learning acceptance of everyone. And that it doesn't matter what someone's path is, that everyone has value. Everyone brings something to the table. And at some point, almost everyone in their life feels like an outcast and feels like they don't belong in one group or another. But the key is, if you don't feel like you belong in some place, well, question why you're there in the first place. And if it isn't going to benefit you, then go find another group where you do belong or you do feel comfortable.
Yeah, so, or create your own.
Exactly, or create your own. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and I think again that's a big wound for a lot of women that are leading. You know, that whole kind of sense of where do I belong, where do I fit in, and you know, sometimes it's about actually birthing your own tribe, your own community, and lead. You know, or maybe it's just about that's not the right place. You know, I think we all want to connect. And so if it doesn't feel like it's a fit for you, or you're feeling uncomfortable, then maybe, you know, it's just not there, but somewhere else. Yeah.
Well, that's true, but who's to say there won't be one or two good things that come out of that?
For sure. As I say, you know, we're always learning, aren't we? And so for me, anywhere that I get triggered, there's always a, you know, kind of like, what's my bit in it? How did I create that? And usually it's because, you know, our soul is wanting us to grow and heal and learn. So we take the lesson from it, and then, you know, then we move forward. Yeah. Okay, so how can we get more comfortable with telling our stories?
Take a look in the mirror and gaze with love and appreciation for every experience that you've ever survived, and to realize that you are truly a gift from Source, from God, Spirit, the universe, Buddha, Jesus, by whatever term you feel most comfortable, and to practice feeling that on such a visceral level that it becomes second nature. And if that means looking in the mirror every day and saying, I love you, you have value, you are here for a reason, then start there. And when it comes to sharing parts of your story, so we touched on this a little bit earlier, there are two kinds of people that share their story. There are ones who will keep sharing and keep sharing and keep sharing, and you want to distance yourself from them because it's so emotionally and energetically draining. And then there are the kind of people who can share their story and yet inspire other people with it. And the difference between the two is One is all in the negative and in the heavy, and then the other incorporates the things that have been learned along the line. And to go one step further, if they are a teacher or an educator or a leader, then they can also share what they've witnessed as part of teaching what they've learned. So you've got the personal story component, you've got the teaching or the learning, and then we'll call it the case study piece. Because you're sharing what you've seen as a result of what you've taught. And that changes the whole dynamic of everything, because at some point you'll tap into something that people can relate to, and you'll get the ooh, tell me more.
Yeah, so it's part of I guess when I'm working with people and helping them with their niche and their story, it's about sharing from that perspective of how is it useful, how are we going to inspire and empower their clients, their people, because telling our story is not about us, it's more about the people and how that's going to be received and what that's going to do for them, and how they can connect with that.
And if they when someone shares and they do so with an absolutely pure intent that someone else will learn something from what they share, then it almost puts you in a state of just downloading what it is you need to convey, and it takes the ego out of it completely. Because everyone can tell the difference between someone who is sharing from their heart and to give versus someone who is sharing where it's all like ego driven and it's all about them. It's not coming from a place of service. So very, very different dynamics.
Yeah. Okay. And so what are that's one of the mistakes, I guess we could say, one of the mistakes people make when they're telling their story. What are some of the other mistakes that you see people making when they're sharing a story?
They don't pace themselves, meaning they ramble really quickly and they say so much without changing the volume of their voice or the pace or incorporating something else to make the story relatable. So if you can combine other things that you've seen or experienced and help weave that in, that makes all the difference. So for example, when like earlier, like say with the can of worms piece or the diving in and moving through it, I had heard, so long ago, but I started telling this in my talks, that out in the Midwest on the plains, there was a very distinct difference between cattle and bison. So when a storm is coming across the plain, the cattle will run away from the storm in attempts to get away from it. They will exhaust themselves and the storm will still catch them. Versus the bison, who run directly into the storm to get through it faster, and they get out the other side. So, which do you want to be, the cattle or the bison? Well, I was on an airplane heading to the Southwest, and I heard a gentleman a few rows in front of me say that he was from Oklahoma. And immediately I said, oh, I have to go ask a gentleman this question. Is this true? Because it sounded really good. And it turns out it was, in fact, true. So the more that we can weave something relatable into it and incorporate the word you as opposed to the word I, it helps draw other people in.
Yeah. I love nature's so powerful, isn't it? We learn so much from one another, from the world. It's like the whole world is our learning.
Indeed it is.
Okay. So any other mistakes that people might make?
They put off a vibe that is of unworthiness or shame. That fake it till you make it. I think everybody's heard that. And for any of you, any of the listeners who are still abiding by that, please toss that out the window. Because there is no faking it till you make it. It's in your mind, you may believe that you're doing that, but energetically, you cannot fake such things. So if you are, if energetically and emotionally and spiritually, you're not holding your own and being strong, when you tell that story, you're going to send out a really funny vibe to people that, they may not be able to put their finger on it, but they'll know something's off, and they'll know something's not quite right. They may, walk away from the talk or the interview or what have you and say, gee, there were some interesting things there, but something wasn't quite right and I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
So it's the energy and the place from where one comes when they tell the story.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about some, I know in the early days when I used to speak, I used to get really, really nervous. When I speak, I don't feel as nervous now actually, but if I'm feeling any of that, I think one of the good ways that people can kind of work with that is to give themselves permission to just be human and to make a mistake, or if you're feeling emotional, that's okay, and to actually own that, and people relate to that. So as you're saying, sometimes I think we're kind of maybe through that kind of performance anxiety, if you like, which if you're speaking to a lot of people, sometimes that can come up, but at the end of the day we're speaking to other people, we're all human, and it's okay to just be ourselves. And if we stumble over a word or something, then that's okay.
Oh yes, and don't apologize for it. Just pick the ball back up and keep running with it, because when someone feels the need to apologize, then they're like breaking that tie that's been bonded with the audience already. So they're putting a hiccup in the energy.
Yeah.
And if you can, if people can take that hiccup or whatever it is, and then just even get playful about it, and then just move on, the audience will appreciate it, because they are all probably thinking, holy smokes, I could never do what this person is doing. How are they doing that? And it just, it puts everyone at ease. I mean, I gave a talk last week where, I was absolutely exhausted. It was a very long day, and it was a guest lecture at a local community, university. And so I'm telling them that, okay, well, granted, yes, I was sitting outside earlier. My energy was a little low, and I knew I had to pump myself up here and be all ready and happy and on for you. And so, I told them that what was happening, and I stumbled over a couple of words in the beginning, but I just, I went forward. And when I had referred to the stumbling of the words, I had said, you know what, I knew I did it, and I didn't care. I don't care what you think, because I'm being authentic. I'm moving forward. I'm not letting it hold me up. And there was laughter because of my authenticity. I mean, I kicked off my shoes. I didn't want to wear the heels, and I just went with it. And so when people can be that real and that authentic, it becomes an admirable quality, and people will connect.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what do you recommend people do when they're ready to start telling their story?
Smile a lot. And look at it as anytime you have an audience who comes to hear you, appreciate the fact they took the time. So for one, be grateful for anyone who wants to listen, and weave in something that they can relate to. Be proud of every experience you've ever had that's brought you to where you are. I mean, to own it from the perspective of, I'm who I am today. I'm able to present to you today because of all of this, that I went through, and come from a heart of service, and know that you were given all of these experiences, all of this adversity, if that's the case, because you're meant to make an impact. And feel good about it.
And it doesn't matter how many people, because I know, I think back to my earlier times, and I would get more anxious when I was speaking to a huge number of people than when I was speaking to a small group. And then I see people when they're starting out speaking, they're kind of, maybe they're starting speaking to small groups of people, and then they kind of want to be speaking to more people, and they kind of beat up on themselves if it was only a certain number of people. It's like every person that turns up is a gift, right?
Exactly.
And the people that are meant to be turning up to receive that message on that day from you are there. So it's all perfect.
Precisely. Anytime I hold an event, I always embody that that perspective, because sometimes you get a low turnout, sometimes you get a decent turnout, or even something that exceeds your expectations. But the people who show up are the ones that need to hear it.
Amazing. Okay, so tell us about your free gift. I know you've got some worksheet that you wanted to share.
I do. Well, I made a commitment, and this was a stretch for me, to commit to doing a blog post every week, a Facebook Live every week that took a juicier dive into the blog material, and then a free gift that accompanies that Facebook Live, so that all three of these things provide people material and kind of come at the same subject from different angles, so that people have tools to incorporate that teaching into their life. And all of that, if you were to go onto my Facebook Live page, or excuse me, my Facebook page, which is Healing Through Your Story, you'll be able to catch the Facebook Lives that are there, and then the links to the free gifts will be stated in each of those Facebook Lives, and they're all either 30 minutes or less, so it's not really long. And if you go to the website, you can catch the written part of the blog for anyone who's like a little on the progressive side and they want to read the blog first, then catch the Facebook Live. So you could do that too, and that's at LeslieKarenHammond.com/blog.
Okay, and we'll set up a link so that you can download Leslie's worksheet on empowering your students.
Lots of juicy stuff, and for what it's worth, every week I always end up with a personal experience to help me dive deeper into what I'm writing about.
Yeah.
Never fails.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's another big takeaway for people, actually, because often people say to me, well, I don't know what to write about, what do I blog about, or what can I share? And often, like you, when we're kind of committed to sharing, it's like something will happen, and you don't have to have any particular, you don't have to kind of have it all figured out. You can just actually share what's going on for you, because there will be people that will need to hear that and need to learn how you deal with that and how they can deal with it. So we've always got stories to share, and stories that will inspire and empower one another. Leslie, it's been such a joy to connect with you and to share with you and to dive deeper into this beautiful topic about how we can share our stories and inspire and empower one another. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Kimberly. It's been such a joy. I've had so much fun. Thank you for the opportunity.
So until we speak again, much love. Bye for now, everyone.
All right. Love and light. Bye now.
You've been listening to the Wealthy Business Goddess Show. If you've enjoyed the show, subscribe and review our podcast. Sign up to receive your Wealthy Business Goddess resources and join us in the Wealthy Business Goddess community at www.lovekimberly.com/WBG. To find out more about how Kimberly can support you in creating the life and business of your dreams, or to watch the show via video, visit the website at www.kimberlylovell.com.